The towel was already soaked through by the time the old man's eyes opened. Not a nurse, not a bodyguard, not one of the 6 men who had killed for him without ever asking why. Just a small boy, 6 years old, kneeling beside a bed that smelled of medicine and money, pressing a damp cloth to the forehead of the most feared man in the city. Outside the door, 3 armed guards stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid of a dying man's silence more than they had ever feared his voice. The boy did not run. His hands trembled, but he did not run. "Why are you still here?" the old man whispered, his throat dry as paper. The boy swallowed hard. "Because nobody else came." Somewhere down the hall, a woman was sobbing quietly into her own hands, too afraid to enter the room herself. And nobody in that mansion understood how a housemaid's son had ended up closer to a dying crime lord than any of the men sworn to protect him. To understand that, the story has to go back 6 weeks, to a night when none of this seemed possible at all. If stories like this already have your chest tight, that is exactly the point. Hit subscribe right now, because what happens in the next 50 minutes will follow this boy, this mother, and this dying man somewhere none of them expected to go. Drop a comment with one word for how this hook made you feel, and stay close, because it only gets heavier from here. 6 weeks earlier, the house on the hill did not know kindness. It only knew orders. Adiz had been a housemaid in that mansion for 2 years, and in 2 years she had learned exactly one rule: never look the master of the house in the eye. His name was spoken in the city the way people speak of fire, useful from a distance, deadly up close. He had built an empire from nothing and buried whatever softness he once had somewhere no one could find it. Adiz's son, Kofi, was 6 years old, quiet in the way that children become when they have learned early that the world does not owe them gentleness. His father had died before Kofi could remember his face, and his mother worked from before sunrise until long after the house had gone dark, just to keep a roof above 2 heads instead of 1. Kofi's only wish, whispered to his mother some nights when the house was finally still, was simple. He wanted a father who would teach him to ride a bicycle. He was afraid, more than anything, of being forgotten, the way his own father already had been. The man in the mansion had wishes too, though he never spoke them aloud. Somewhere, beneath the silk suits and the loaded guns, he still remembered a mother who used to hum while she cooked, before poverty and betrayal taught him that softness gets people killed. His fear was quieter than Kofi's, but heavier. He was afraid of dying the way he had lived, surrounded by men who obeyed him and loved by absolutely no one. Nobody in that house knew any of this. Not yet. What they did know was that strange things had started happening. Ledgers went missing from the study at night. A guard who had worked there for 9 years disappeared without a single goodbye. And twice, Adiz noticed the master of the house staring at her son through the kitchen window, saying nothing, his jaw tight, as if the boy reminded him of something he had spent 30 years trying to forget. It was a rainy Tuesday when Kofi first crossed paths with him directly. The boy had wandered too close to the study, chasing a paper boat his mother had folded for him, and the wind had carried it straight beneath the old man's office door. "Whose child is this?" the man said, not to Kofi, but to the guard standing behind him, his voice flat enough to make the guard's hands shake. "The new maid's son, sir." The old man studied Kofi for a long moment. Most adults in that house either ignored Kofi completely or looked at him like a mistake waiting to be corrected. This man did neither. He simply looked, the way someone studies a photograph of a place they used to live. "Come here," he said. Every person in the hallway held their breath. Adiz appeared at the end of the corridor, her heart stopping mid-step, ready to beg for her son's life if it came to that. But Kofi walked forward, small feet on cold marble. He picked up his paper boat from beside the man's polished shoes, and instead of running, he did something nobody in that house had done in years. He smiled at him. You are not afraid of me, the old man said. It was not a question. Should I be? Kofi asked. For the first time in longer than anyone could remember, something cracked in the old man's face. Not kindness exactly. Something closer to memory. That single moment became the first thread pulling two broken lives together, though. Neither of them understood yet how tightly it would eventually bind them. Over the following days, small things began changing. The old man began asking, without ever quite admitting why, whether the maid's boy was fed properly. He left an extra plate at dinner without explanation. Once, from behind the study door, Adiz heard something she never expected to hear in that house. Laughter. His laughter, low and rusted from disuse, followed by the higher, easier laugh of a 6-year-old boy who had somehow found his way inside, showing him a drawing of a bicycle he did not yet own. Will you teach me to ride one? Kofi asked one evening, holding up the crumpled drawing. The old man looked at the paper for a long time before answering. I do not know how to be gentle with anyone anymore. That is okay, Kofi said simply. I can teach you that part too. Adiz watched this unfold with equal parts hope and dread. She had heard the stories about this man, about the empire he ran and the enemies he had buried along the way. Every instinct told her to keep her son as far from that world as possible. But every evening, she watched something soften in a man the whole city believed had nothing left to soften. She did not yet know that her own past was quietly circling back toward this house as well. Carrying secrets she had buried the same way he had buried his. The old man's real name, the one none of his men used anymore, was Baek Do-hyun. Before the guns and the empire, he had been a boy from a fishing village who lost his mother to an illness nobody could afford to treat. He had sworn, kneeling at her grave, that he would never again feel that powerless. He built his fortune on that promise, brick by brick, betrayal by betrayal, until powerlessness became the only feeling he had successfully erased from his life, until a boy with a paper boat walked back into it. Weeks passed. Kofi learned to ride the bicycle Do-hyun quietly had delivered to the estate. Wobbling across the courtyard while the old crime lord stood by, arms crossed, pretending not to smile every time the boy nearly fell and refused to give up. Adiz began to notice him differently too, not as a monster the city whispered about, but as a man clearly starving for the one thing his money could never buy him. Small conversations passed between them in doorways and kitchens, careful at first, then less so. He asked about her husband. She told him the truth, that he had died owing money to men, very much like the ones who now worked for Do-hyun himself. Something in his expression changed when she said that. A flicker of guilt he did not explain. For a while, the house felt almost warm. Kofi's laughter echoed down hallways that had only ever known silence and orders. Adiz allowed herself, cautiously, to imagine a version of the future that did not involve scraping by alone. And Do-hyun, for the first time in 3 decades, allowed himself to imagine a life after the empire, one small and quiet, built around a bicycle and a boy who was not afraid of him. But peace like that never survives long in a house built on blood money. It started with a whisper among the guards. Someone was asking questions about Adiz, about where she had worked before, about a husband who had supposedly died owing a debt. Do-hyun dismissed it at first. Then one of his most trusted men, a soldier named Isul, who had served him for over a decade, requested a private meeting. The maid is not who she says she is, Isul told him, sliding a folder across the desk. Do-hyun opened it slowly. Inside were documents, old records, a photograph he had not seen in over 15 years. A name from his past, connected directly to Adiz's late husband. A debt that had never truly been about money at all. He did not know it yet, but that single folder had already signed someone's fate. That night, Do-hyun called Adiz into his study. His voice was calm, dangerously calm. The voice his enemies had learned to fear more than his shouting ever could. "Tell me the truth," he said, sliding the folder toward her. "All of it." Adi's hands shook as she opened it. Her husband had not simply died owing a debt to strangers. He had died because he refused to betray a man named Do-hyun once trusted. Completely, a man who had later ordered his death without ever learning his name. The room went silent except for the rain against the windows. "You knew," Do-hyun said quietly. "You knew this whole time, and you brought your son into my house anyway." "I did not know until it was too late to leave," Adiz whispered. "And by then, your house was the only place keeping us fed." Before Do-hyun could answer, the door burst open. Isul stood there, gun already raised, eyes cold with a decision he had clearly made long before entering the room. "She is a liability," Isul said. "And so is the boy." Everything happened at once after that. Kofi, who had been listening from the hallway the way children always do when adults think they cannot hear, screamed his mother's name and ran straight toward the study. "Kofi, stay back," Adiz cried, throwing herself in front of him. Do-hyun moved faster than a dying man should have been able to move, stepping directly between Isul's weapon and the two people who had somehow become the only family he had left. "You will not touch either of them," he said, his voice shaking with something that was not fear. "You are choosing them over 30 years of loyalty." Isul spat. "I am choosing what loyalty was always supposed to mean," Do-hyun answered. "If your heart is already pounding, that means this story is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. This is the part where everything is about to break wide open, so make sure you are subscribe before the next few minutes change everything you thought you understood about this house. Comment right now if you already think you know who survives this night, because you are about to find out how wrong that guess really is. The confrontation spilled out of the study and into the corridor, guards scrambling from every direction, unsure which side to defend. Isul, desperate and cornered by his own betrayal being exposed, grabbed Kofi by the arm and dragged him toward the front doors, using the boy as the only leverage he had left. "Let go of him," Adiz screamed, lunging forward, only to be held back by two guards still loyal to Isul. "One step closer," Isul warned, pressing the weapon toward Kofi's trembling shoulder. "And the boy pays for what his mother's husband refused to give us 15 years ago." Do-hyun raised both hands slowly, stepping forward despite every guard warning him not to. "Then let it be me," he said. "Take whatever debt you believe is owed, and take it from the one who actually owes it." For the first time in the entire night, Isul hesitated. "You would die for a maid's son," Isul said, almost laughing in disbelief. "I would die for the only two people who ever made this house feel like a home," Do-hyun answered, and something about the steadiness in his voice made even his most loyal soldiers lower their weapons. Kofi, sensing the shift, twisted free the moment Isul's grip loosened in surprise, running straight into his mother's arms while chaos erupted around them. Shots were fired. Guards, loyal to Do-hyun, surged forward to reclaim control of the house they had let slip into betrayal. In the confusion, Isul turned his weapon toward Do-hyun himself, the man he had once sworn his life to protect. The single gunshot that followed echoed through the entire estate. Do-hyun collapsed against the marble floor, blood spreading slowly beneath him, his eyes finding Kofi's terrified face across the chaos of the room. "The boat," he whispered, barely audible. "Do not let go of the boat." Loyal guards finally overwhelmed Isul, disarming him as sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. But none of that mattered to Kofi, who broke free from his mother's arms and ran straight to the dying man's side, pressing his small hands over the wound the same way his mother had once taught him to press a cloth over a fever. Adiz arrived seconds later, screaming for anyone to call for help, cradling both her son and the man bleeding out on his own study floor. Stay with us, Kofi begged, tears streaming freely now. You still have to teach me the part where you let go of the handlebars. Do-hyun's lips curved into something that almost resembled peace. You already know how to do that part, he whispered. You never needed me for that. The ambulance arrived not a moment too soon, though the doctors who took him away offered no promises, only grim silence and a warning that the next few hours would decide everything. Kofi refused to leave the hospital hallway that entire night, still clutching the paper boat Do-hyun had once picked up off his study floor, now creased and worn from being carried everywhere for weeks. Adiz sat beside her son, exhausted, terrified, and for the first time in years, unwilling to imagine a version of her future that did not include the man fighting for his life behind those doors. At exactly 2:47 in the morning, a nurse finally stepped into the hallway. Do-hyun had survived the surgery. The following weeks were slow and quiet in a way the mansion had never known. Do-hyun spent his recovery mostly in silence, though visitors noticed something had shifted permanently in him, a softness that no longer needed hiding. He formally severed ties with the parts of his empire built on fear, transferring loyal soldiers into legitimate work and quietly settling debts connected to men his past had wronged, including, at long last, the family of Adiz's husband. Adiz remained in the house, though no longer as staff. Do-hyun made sure of that, insisting instead that she and Kofi belonged there as family, not employees, a distinction he repeated firmly to anyone who dared question it. Kofi finally learned to ride his bicycle without training wheels the following spring, wobbling once more across the same courtyard, except this time Do-hyun walked slowly beside him, leaning on a cane he still needed, refusing every offer of help from the guards nearby. Do not let go of the handlebars too early, Do-hyun called out, laughing for what felt like the first time in 30 years. You already taught me that part, Kofi shouted back, pedaling faster, laughter trailing behind him across the courtyard. That evening, as the sun lowered over the estate, Do-hyun sat on the porch steps beside Adiz, watching her son ride circles around the fountain that had once symbolized nothing but wealth and now simply meant home. I spent 30 years believing power was the only thing that could protect a person, Do-hyun said quietly. It took a 6-year-old boy and a paper boat to teach me I was wrong. The entire time. Adiz smiled softly, watching her son wave at them from across the yard. Loyalty was never supposed to be about fear, she said. He taught you the same thing his father tried to teach the people who killed him for it. Years later, long after the estate had become known throughout the city for quiet charity, work rather than quiet fear, a small, faded paper boat still sat inside a drawer in what used to be Do-hyun's study. Visitors who noticed it always assumed it was simply an old keepsake, forgotten and insignificant. They were wrong. It stayed there not because it was valuable, but because it reminded an old man, every single day, of the exact night a 6-year-old boy showed him what real loyalty looked like, and never once let go of the handlebars. If this story moved you even a little, make sure you are subscribed, because Hidden Fortune Tales has many more emotional journeys like this one waiting for you. Drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from and what time it is right there, and give this video a like if you believe loyalty like this is worth remembering. Stay close, because the next story might just break your heart in an entirely new way.